All right. Thanks so much for joining us here at the Cannabis 360 conference. We have a couple different speakers and some great topics coming on board. Before we introduce the topic, before we do any of that, I just want to give a shout out to Connor and his team for creating this conference. It's significant for the future of the industry that we get conversations like these out. It's really interesting because now we're starting to see emerging markets at more of a rapid pace start to legalize adult use as well as medicinal. And so conversations like these, especially around technology, are so important. So we're going to be talking with Christopher Budd today, as well as Hardeep. Hardeep, Chris, why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves first? Tell us a little bit about yourselves, and then we'll dive right into the topic and get started on some questions.
My name is Chris Budd, and thank you very much for having me on this panel. Looking forward to it. I'm one of the founders of Isolocity. Isolocity is a quality management software that specializes in mitigating the labor involved in quality compliance. We have been playing in the legal cannabis space for about 5 or 6 years now in Canada, and have successfully expanded internationally. We are now in 14 different countries in the cannabis market right now. So that's pretty exciting. Myself, I am a quality expert when it comes to compliance. I've been an auditor, I've been a consultant, and now I am a software guy. So very excited to be here.
I'm Hardeep. I'm the Chief Product Officer and one of the co-founders of Elevate Signals as well. We make manufacturing software, so trying to increase visibility into inventory and complementing technology like Isolocity. Our goal is to basically capture as much information about the supply chain so that you can make business decisions around data. So yeah.
Amazing. What a great word, data. It seems to be the hottest topic of the cannabis industry because there just isn't that much. So I'm excited to dig into it. Today we're going to be talking about creating operational efficiency through technology. It's awesome that we have Hardeep and Chris on the phone and on camera here today, because like you heard it, like these two guys are leading companies not only in Canada but a variety of different places. Chris, I think you mentioned 14 countries, which is key. And so the insights that you have, Hardeep, Chris, are going to live on for a long time, because we've effectively seen the future here in Canada. So let's dive right into it. Obviously, the cannabis market is evolving and maturing at a rapid pace, the quickest of paces. So how have the needs of licensed producers over the last several years, and how have the needs of the licensed producers changed, and how has technology adapted in order to meet those needs? LPs are such complicated beasts. Regulatory frameworks are so complicated. So talk to us and give us some context on kind of the change first, and then we'll jump into the evolving technology. Hardeep, why don't we start with you?
I would say early on, it was a new market. There were fewer producers in the market. Profit margins were much higher. We've got a lot more licensed producers. The market obviously has been growing at the pace that it's growing. So one of the biggest challenges has been that initially there was a huge regulatory burden on licensed producers. And, it wasn't really so much about managing the supply chain as it was really trying to meet the Health Canada requirements. But now what's happened is that there's been price compression. There's a lot more players in the market. So differentiating your brand, differentiating product has become a lot more important. And basically, as a result of that, what's happened is that on top of this regulatory framework, now they actually have to start really thinking about it in terms of supply chain management as well, right? It's become a lot more complex. They've got a lot more SKUs. They've got a lot more people at the facilities. Everybody's kind of working to get this, great product out to the market. But in doing so, there's a lot of, challenges around transparency of information, access to information, being able to make decisions based around that information. And so these days, what we're seeing a lot of people trying to figure out, okay, how do we actually get information from the shop floor, in front of the decision makers, the managers, so that they can start, really thinking about how to fine tune their businesses and ultimately one of the biggest topics at the moment is cost of goods sold, right? So cost of goods sold, understanding cost of goods sold, and how do you play with that? So change really has been that now. One of the things I like to say is that, you know, early on, it was really associated with kind of like farming and agriculture. And these days, I would say that it's much more in tune with manufacturing. So discrete manufacturing. So go to chip manufacturing, automotive manufacturing, you know, they all talk about the similar kinds of concepts that are emerging in the cannabis industry now.
To sort of build on Hardeep's points, and if you look at traditional industries, if I guess you could almost say cannabis is now becoming a traditional industry, but those who can eliminate the direct labor component from the cost structure are usually the ones that are more successful long term. So bringing it back to how technology has helped drive that reduction of direct labor, and that's all about creating more efficiencies with how you correlate your data, and that is with things such as integration. So you're having your systems speak to each other, getting more quality data inputs, so you're able to utilize the data to run your regression models to understand what's working, what's not working in your grow rooms, but also making the contracts a little bit easier for companies to get into, making things a little bit less complicated when it comes to how you set up your systems. So providing a lot more value. Maybe you have a bit of a freemium model as well too, right? So coming in and playing with the market needs right now, which is bring costs down. So how do you bring costs down? You bring costs down through the reduction of direct labor, and you do that through introducing technology that allows you to automate your processes, and you provide it with technology and software that can correlate the data from those automated processes to allow the business owners or business leaders or steering committee to make informed decisions to improve operations and to move the company forward in a profitable manner.
And do you find that it's both of the technologies that you both operate are incredible and are changing the game and helping evolve the cannabis game significantly. But in both of these, do you find that there's a significant change management piece of things to adopting the technology and also educating the steering committee on how to leverage not only the technology that they're using to drive efficiencies, but also now to, Hardeep, to actually be able to give them the data, but help them analyze it and drive insights? Like, what is the change management process when you're selling into some of these LPs? And because you guys are responsible for essentially opening up the vision and saying, hey, here's the better way that you need to do this. So there's that selling cycle there, but there's also that change management component. So can we just discuss a little bit of kind of that change management component when you're implementing some of the technologies with these LPs? Hardeep, we'll go to you on that.
Change management is huge. It really makes or breaks an implementation of a piece of software. The ones that we see that can do it really well usually have like a point person, or they'll have a team or a little committee that is effectively bringing in change management for the organization. I think one of the things that I would say for any organization, it's a bit of like a cultural change sometimes as well, going from maybe analog systems to digital systems, right? So I would say that as a part of, like, whenever we go into pretty much any business, we're effectively doing change management, right? And one of the things that I find very interesting about the cannabis industry compared to just like other software industries is, for cannabis, it doesn't matter if you're a micro or you're one of the largest producers. It effectively is like enterprise change management, right? Because there's so many frameworks in place, like there's SOPs, and they've got different standards and different procedures for certain things. And so a lot of it comes down to really trying to understand the processes and the people involved. And sometimes before you even on our team, right, we don't implement technology until we've understood the processes that happen. So first, when we go into an organization, it's really dissecting their processes, creating process maps, sometimes looking at their SOPs, really kind of doing an analysis of like how this organization functions. And then from that, it's usually, okay, now we've got that in place. Let's leverage the technology to carry out, those processes and kind of that vision and dream that you're talking about, right? So yeah, change management is super key.
Well said. I feel like that's a big missing piece in a lot of the industry today. Is like I used to work at Salesforce back in the day, and one of the things we would always talk about is it's one thing to sell, the Ferrari, but you still need to be able to put gas in it and be able to drive it, essentially.
Exactly.
So Chris, you have a storied career, and you've been in quality assurance management. You were at Magna. You were obviously in the automotive industry, doing a whole bunch of different things. What kind of lessons from a kind of I know, and just kind of going back on Hardeep's point of the people in the steering committee and driving the change management, what kind of lessons can some of these LPs learn from change management from somewhere like the automotive industry?
Proof of concepts are incredible. So we would be bringing on a Toyota part or a Honda part, and they have their own way of going about managing their supply chain, but also managing their part quality. So what we would do is we would set up essentially a Toyota production model in various parts of the factory. So the factory area that operates and produces the parts for Toyota or for Honda would operate under this way. And once we found we got stability and it was working really well, we then rolled out the lessons learned and the best practices to the other areas of the factory. And then everything else would benefit from those enhanced quality protocols. It's the same thing with cannabis. So with our approach, if you're a multi-site operator, or if you're a micro or a standard producer, we like to work with what we call proof of concept. So if you're a big company, have multiple sites, we'll start with your smallest site, and we'll bring the site up to speed with isolocity, run it, ensure that we've worked out all the kinks, and then roll that methodology out to the rest of the facilities. The same sort of principle would apply for a standard cultivator or processor. Maybe you're picking on the sanitation program, for example, or the SOP management. So you start small and then you continue to build. You don't want to overwhelm the workforce or the group in completely overhauling their quality system at once. This is something you trickle it in. And as you take a more conservative approach with implementations, it's a lot more successful long-term. So the lessons learned from my automotive history or experience would be to start small and then continue to build on that rather than trying to conquer the whole project at once. So working on those proof of concepts, ironing out the kinks, and then rolling out with your lessons learned and best practices for the rest of the company.
Yeah, proof of concepts are so important. I think that crawl, walk, run approach is so powerful. So now we're starting to see a lot of emerging markets. We're starting to see a lot of different types of producers and cultivators all around. I was just on a call for the New York market, and we're starting to see kind of that market roll out, and we have the German market roll out. So just on the same note of kind of cultivators, licensed producers, I mean, what are some things that they need to be taking from the Canadian market now that we've kind of gone from a medicinal standpoint into a different regulatory regime with adult use? I mean, what can emerging markets learn from Canada from the perspective of some of the technologies that the both of you are starting to implement? Because Canada is such a big piece of the pie, but it seems like not a lot of international markets are leveraging that knowledge, and we have so much knowledge. So see, Hardeep, I see you smiling there. So talk to us about that. We'll shift over to you, Chris.
Yeah, so I was just chuckling because Chris, both Chris and I have been kind of traveling around quite a bit, going from market to market, just looking at it, analyzing them. Obviously, we're involved in international markets as well. And one of the things that I think really would be valuable is to come and see operations in Canada, to talk to operators in Canada, to really understand what has worked and what has not worked. Obviously, there are nuances to every single market. If you're like South Africa is very different than Germany, for example, in terms of how they operate. But I think for any emerging market, there is one thing that I think happens all the time, and that's that hype cycle curve, right? So initially, a lot of investment goes into a new market, a lot of build out happens, a lot of sometimes retail expansion in the US. And what ends up happening is as that market, as that money is kind of being saturated into those early players, the expectations aren't being returned from investors. You usually get a huge dip in the market, right? And that's the trough of despair. And then it's a slow recovery from that until you get a stable market again. And so the challenge for international operators is to not hit that cycle like we have in Canada, to not hit that cycle like we have in California, right? In Colorado, in a lot of the Western states. The Eastern states are getting a lot of investment currently. And so international markets are getting a lot of investment early, right? And I think really, really one of the things that I'm starting to see a little bit of is certain players in these international markets are picking up on this, and they're focused on cost of goods sold, and they're focused on not over expansion right out of the gate, right? So it's still that crawl, walk, run approach. But I think that is one of the biggest challenges for anybody who's in an emerging market internationally, is just to make sure that, when that dip happens, and always inevitably happens, that they're one of the companies that can come out and be in that stable market.
Mm-hmm. And that comes down to cost. To cost management, right? And not taking on too much capital expenditures early on. And really, when you start a business, we've all been there, you don't buy everything you need at once, right? And I think that's the problem we see in the Canadian market, is that a lot of the guys who are early into the market were told they had to buy this, they had to use this, they needed this piece of equipment, and they had to use this piece of lighting, and all of a sudden they haven't even grown a plant and they have no money left. So I think that would be the biggest lessons learned that any international market or emerging market can look at from the Canadian lessons learned, is that you don't need to come out of the gate with everything in place. You can chip away at it piece by piece, understand your process, understand your people, get your culture down, get your brand down, and then focus on improving on efficiencies as you move forward.
I love this conversation so much because it's everything that you guys are saying is just like, it's so pertinent and so important, because I didn't come from CPG. I didn't come from this angle. And so kind of seeing it with a fresh face allows us to also, to your point, like Chris, everyone tried to do everything at one time, right? When we rolled out, you couldn't get a gram of cannabis sold because there was literally nowhere to sell it for so long. And then there was this massive oversupply and then undersupply. And so, as these emerging markets roll out and we start to look at the Canadian lessons, what are some things, and I want to go back to the capital piece of things after this question, but what are some kind of incremental wins that some of these emerging market cultivators can look at? So how do you know that you're on the right track, essentially? If you can't necessarily forecast the market, forecast the demand, instead of trying to roll out all at once, like, what kind of things can these cultivators look to do in an incremental win or an incremental growth perspective? I love how you're talking about culture, Chris, because no one is talking about culture, right? But what are some other pieces that if I'm an emerging market cultivator, I can say, hey, I'm doing the right thing because of these incremental wins? And this is a hard question, but like, what is my time frame for winning, essentially, right? And how do I know I've won? Is that a fair question? I don't know.
I could take it, but it always comes back to the fundamentals, right? Do you have a good product, and are you cash flow positive? And if you're not either of those, you're not going to last very long. So obviously get the product quality down, and it comes not even from a cultivator perspective, but if you're providing equipment or you're providing software, it's got to be a good product. It's got to add value. Or the consumers need to want to consume your product, for example. And then also just ensuring that you have cost management in place, right? You're not overextending yourselves. And then with that, you reduce the stress level on the organization if you have cost management in place. and you're able to focus on continuing to breed good quality product, have a good company culture where people love to work at, and that in itself propagates your company to become more successful, right? So, but I would say good product and cost management would be the first two things they need to have from a fundamental in place. And
I mean, for me, I think really that culture piece is so fundamental. I like to borrow things from, I've been in software for most of my career. I got into cannabis in 2017. That was when I entered into this market. And so before that, a lot of my understanding of startups and processes and all that kind of stuff comes from the software world. And so when I think about a startup, I think about lean startup, right? The lean startup approach to how you go about initially it's like even doing an analysis of who can you sell to, right? Who is going to buy your product, right? Because once you got to understand what your market is. Once you understand your market, then you can start understanding what kind of capacity you need to build for, right? Once you understand that capacity, then it's really just kind of doing that fundamental business analysis initially, and then building a great team around that. And so building that great team comes down to, okay, like what kind of cultural aspects are you trying to bring in, right? Resourcefulness, that's usually a part of this whole lean startup approach. I also recommend some books like The Hard Thing About Hard Things, right? Toyota Way, we always talk about that, right? There's really, really great resources out there for, creating great cultures that will enable success, long-term success. And I think in terms of like the length of how long this is going to take, like, honestly, I sometimes wonder, I think Germany legalizing will be huge and impactful, right? The US at some point doing the same would be huge and impactful. And then until those things are starting to happen, until the largest players, the largest markets are kind of getting behind this, it's still a very early market. Like, even though we've been in the industry since 2017, we're all still startups, right? It's still a very startup environment where there's no clear winners in the market. Who's going to win 5 years out from now? Not sure, right? So that would be my thoughts around that.
I like to think that most of especially in technology, most of these the most valuable companies haven't even started yet because of the opportunities. And so it's going to be really interesting to see from a tech perspective what actually comes to fruition. I was a Dutchie for 2 years, and that was a specific niche of a problem that was happening within the space and kind of expanding. And then COVID happened, so online ordering became such a massive piece of things. So I love it's so funny to say, because the fundamentals, the culture, managing costs, I mean, these are things that you get taught in business school, but all of a sudden, the wild west of cannabis happens, and it's like a race, right? Yeah. It's just like thrown out the window. So it's really slow. It's tortoise versus hare type approach, right? So let's talk about this for a second. So profitability is super elusive in cannabis. Sometimes I'll post on LinkedIn, just how do you win as a cannabis company? And that's why I asked it. Or how do you actually make money? Or what do you do? What do you need to do? And profitability is such an elusive thing for so many companies. Heavy capital investments coming in. Lending has dried up, especially in Canada. So what are some strategies that some of these LPs, some of these orgs can drive right now outside of kind of culture, cost management? Like, how do you become a profitable company as an LP, as a cultivator in cannabis? And a broad question, but I know a lot of people are interested to hear the answer. Thoughts?
Well, I mean, it comes back to sort of the principle that Hardeep was just touching on with the lean startup, but there's also principles such as lean manufacturing. And not a lot of companies are thinking about how they actually operate on a regular basis? Do they have dashboarding? Are they actually managing their quality KPIs correctly? Or are they just collecting KPIs just to collect KPIs? So lean manufacturing is a big part of everything, is reducing the 8 types of waste in lean. And there's some great reading out there as well on lean manufacturing. And so that would be definitely one principle from an operations perspective, is what they can really look at as far as how they can find efficiencies. They can produce more with less, and with less waste as well too. But you want to reduce your waste, right? So you want to you don't want to scrap as much as you should be. So you want to be able to grow a good product and have that environment in control. But you also want to make sure that you're not over resourced from a labor perspective. And how do you do that? Is that you implement systems or methodologies that allow for remote work, that allow for things to happen more efficiently, with less work involved. And so that's the whole idea behind lean manufacturing, is to produce more with less. So we can go on, we can have a 10-day seminar on lean manufacturing. And I just think that this industry is not focusing on the fundamentals of good business, and good business is operating in a lean capacity. And that's my experience. And I think the companies that are doing well have adopted some of those methodologies. They've looked at their processes. They looked at their systems in place. Do the systems integrate? Do they speak to each other? Are we double handling data? And also looking at the culture of a good company. And if you like the company you work for and you like who you work with, you're all going to try hard to do well for the company. And I think that's sometimes a bit of a problem in this industry, that there's a lot of cultures out there that could use a bit of a shot in the arm.
This is something that we do internally quite a bit, is we're always kind of reflecting and doing retrospectives and really trying to understand our business, how we operate, how we basically conduct anything, right? And I think it's a very hard industry to be in. Sometimes I wonder, it's like, are we all just a bunch of masochists in the cannabis industry, right? So I think that a lot of it comes down to, to Chris's point, do we actually have the most optimal X, Y, and Z, right? That is from every aspect of the business. Every aspect of the business should be analyzed under a microscope, in sense of are we doing this in the best way possible? And obviously one of the challenges to that is, once you start doing that exercise, everything looks like a disaster, right? So then you got to start, okay, what is actually important? What needs to be prioritized? What should we be changing in order to actually have an impact where we're changing the culture, we're changing behavior, we're bringing the right people onto the team that, to Chris's point, are really motivated and making, not just kind of going with what's in place, but also leveraging that same framework and improving it themselves, right? So really kind of the core concepts probably are, it really comes down to that team, the culture that gets put into that team, because lean manufacturing, all those types of things will come innately from a culture that really pushes those types of thoughts and ideas and learnings.
Which makes technology providers like yourselves so incredibly important, because you're not only the technology providers, but you're the guiders and the credibility, and you've seen it across cosmetics and automotive, and you're bringing that knowledge in. So let me ask you, open APIs, partner ecosystems, how do you, as elevated signals and Isolocity, how do you start to figure out and internally think about your partnership ecosystem and your bolt-ons, and how do you start to think about extending your platforms? Because obviously elevated signals and Isolocity integrate with one another, and I'm sure there's a lot of companies that want to integrate with you guys, both of you, right? So how do you choose who to integrate with? What does the technology process internally look like on your side of things in that change management?
I guess I can take a stab at it first. So you want Hardeep?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, it's client So obviously, Elevated Signals and Isolocity, we're friends. We get along really well, and we enjoy each other's company. But we integrated because there was a need from our common clients. So we listen to what the clients want and what they need, and we try to deliver that efficiency with the integrations. From a partner ecosystem perspective, obviously you can't be everyone's best friend, but you let the decision-making process happen through the lens of your customers. So if your customers, who are obviously, if you don't have customers, you don't have a business, if they need a problem to be solved with a current technology provider they have, and it makes sense from a strategic direction, then that is something that obviously we undertake and we go through and we integrate with Elevated Signals, but also other systems as well too in this market. Change management when it comes to software and what does that look like? You know, from our perspective, we're always trying to make it easier to use. So you remember those big yellow books that was like Microsoft for Dummies, or you know, but that's, but you know, not that we're trying to rip that off, but that is our approach. It's quality compliance for dummies. Like, we're really trying to make it easier to digest, easier to use, easier to jump into. And that's, so our whole mantra here at Isolocity is all about user interface, how the user can come in and start using the system, and then also correlate with other softwares that our clients are also using, such as Elevated Signals.
For us, since day one, we knew that we were part of, we're part of the larger system. Our technology is going to play a role within this organization, but they're going to need many, many different pieces of technology in order to really have that business run. And so we adopted open APIs right out of the gate. And we actually leverage our own APIs to build our own tools and everything like that as well. Ben and myself are technical co-founders. We worked for this company called Nitobi that was making open source software. So we really got a taste for kind of just when you can bring technology together and kind of have it all integrate, just how powerful that can be. That's, leveraging that for our mutual customers. So we actually have an open API. We've got OAuth 2 capabilities. We've kind of opened it up so that anybody who really wants to integrate with Elevated Signals can. We've got a developer program as well. And so really it just comes down to understanding that in order for these businesses to be successful, we need to work with other players. And that was not something that we saw when we first got into this industry. It was closed, it was like walled garden technology solutions, right? Or it was technology solutions that made it very difficult for developers to interact with. So when we think about our APIs and everything like that, we're thinking about the developers that work at these other organizations. What kind of tools do they want to work with, right? Like, what kind of developer experience do they want to work with? Do they want to work with like 1990s technology, or do they want to work with today's technology, right? So it's a very I guess it's just we've taken the approach to this industry how we would have taken the approach to any other software industry.
Yeah, no doubt. I still, it's, again, we go back to the Ferrari aspect of things and the change management aspect of things. And like, to your point, Chris, like the onboarding is something that a lot of the time, like you have the buy-in, but like the onboarding is missed, and everyone especially in cannabis is running around like in regular industry. It's very, very challenging to fully implement software. Even a clicks not code software like Salesforce. So with ERPs and with quality assurance management software, with what you guys are doing, it's harder, right, and more challenging. And so the quality assurance management for dummies, or whatever the case, is such a key aspect of things that I think sometimes can be missed from an onboarding perspective. Any tips or tricks for any cultivators or organizations, or just around onboarding as a whole when they bring on a new technology? I mean, you guys obviously both offer support, you're ingrained in the same partner ecosystem, but what have you seen worked well from an onboarding perspective? And typically, how long from kind of seed to sale does it take for, Isolocity and Elevated Signals to actually be fully onboarded? Like, what is the life cycle of kind of that sale into being fully up and running on both platforms?
So we find what we have, and obviously what we have may not be the best solution, but we have in-app learning centers and quizzes. So for example, every single one of the employees for our clients will have access to Isolocity through various user levels, but each user level has a dedicated curriculum. And that curriculum is built into the system, and that comes with videos and walkthroughs and all these types of resources that they can follow and utilize in their own sandbox. So they can play with the system, mess around with it, throw mud on the wall, and that's not going to affect any of their production data. But more importantly, the system then also offers quizzes on these curriculums. So it tells the user if they fully understand the module or not. And then obviously we have full support and training and data loading services as well with our customer success team. But we have found that having the in-app curriculum that's tailored per user level has been very successful for our clients. More importantly, because there's turnover with workforce. And so when you have someone who's new to the organization, they're coming in, you don't want to have that burden put on the QAP or the head of cultivation to then train that person on how to use the software. They can leverage our toolkit internally. That new employee can then learn the software within the software, and then obviously set up Q&A sessions with our staff to help walk through any sort of uncertainties that they still may have on how to utilize it. So in-app training and quizzes, curriculum with a sandbox is an excellent approach to helping bring clients on. And, from a timeline perspective, it really varies. Sometimes there's a client that comes to us and says, hey, we need this going by Monday. And, we just make it happen. And then there's some larger clients that say, okay, we want full deployment by the end of the year. And so we're going to start, day one, Q1. And our goal is to have all of our sites up and running, fully validated by the end of the year. And so it all depends on the strategy, but we're pretty flexible when it comes to how quickly we can react and what we can do.
A lot of similarities. We also have a heavy approach on customer success as well. So, from Salesforce days that we try to put a customer success rep with every single company that's onboarding. They'll spend some time with them and make sure that they're onboarded because, within those first 2 weeks, there's so many questions that come up. There's so many challenges that they might have just in terms of now conceptually understanding something a little bit differently. So our goal is to basically streamline that as much as possible. And it's the same thing. We've done, onboardings over the weekend, but, sometimes that's not the greatest thing to do. So really, our goal is basically within the first month to have all their inventory up and live in the software so we can validate it by doing a CTS report and making sure all the numbers line up. And usually right after that, we show them how to do some quality aspects within the software as well. And then that's where kind of that integration with Isolocity and Elevated Signals kicks in. So yeah, it really varies from organization to organization. A tip that I would give is lean on your software vendor to provide some resources and guidance on best practices in terms of how to implement the piece of software as well.
Yeah, big time. It's no joke buying software or evaluating software, then buying it, then onboarding it, implementing it, then onboarding it, then making it function. And it's not just it's awesome to hear that you guys can turn around some onboarding pretty quick there, Chris, on 3-day turnaround. But that speaks to just the flexibility of how you both have built the internal teams, and love the focus on customer success so that you can obviously grow with your customers as they grow. What kind of models do you guys work on? Is it is it an MRR type model for Isolocity and Elevated Signals, monthly fee, or help us understand kind of the model behind some of the software that you guys are selling?
Well, we have a hybrid approach. We have a per user model, but we also have a freemium model as well, which is nice, which allows companies to scale up with the system and not necessarily break too much of the bank. And we also have a corporate pricing structure where it's a capped fee, and it's pretty much an all you can eat, all you can drink type of situation with the system. But it's MRR. There is no professional service fees with Isolocity, so we don't charge any onboarding fees. We do not charge an activation fee, nor do we charge any sort of variable fees when it comes to customer support or success. That's all built into the software subscription fee. And I think that makes it easier for our clients. And kind of bringing it back to the first question, I believe, was just making the contract simpler and easier for companies to digest and understand. And that's what we really try to do here at Isolocity.
Love that there's no professional services fees. That's incredible. Well done. I hope everyone who's listening to that understands the true value of that, because that is a massive value. So hopefully there's some good stuff in the pipeline for you guys, Chris, because that, honestly, professional services fees and the fact that you guys include that is incredible. Huge release on the total cost of ownership of that software. So well done. Or what about you guys? Same type of model, or
Similar. It's a SaaS fee, so monthly recurring fee that the users pay. And yeah, we've tried to keep it pretty simple. It's, we chat with our customers, we understand their business, and our goal is to grow as they grow, right? So we try to provide a fee that's suitable on both sides, and make sure that, like, as they succeed, we succeed. And sometimes there's challenges, so you got to readjust, but it's really just about making sure that both parties are in a good place, and we can help each other succeed.
Absolutely. So we have a couple minutes left, and this has been an awesome conversation. I've learned a ton, and I'm looking forward to learning more from you both. But out of curiosity, you've both been in the industry. Hardeep, you said you've been in the space for about the last 5-6 years. Chris, you've been in the space for, I'm assuming, quite some time as well. Around what time did you start working in the cannabis space?
Our first cannabis client was, I think, 2017.
Okay. So both of you, 2017, you're both OGs, you're both vets. What's one piece of advice that you would give to, and I know we've talked a lot about this, but knowing what you know today, that you started back then and starting back 5 years ago, what's one piece of advice that you give to, again, emerging markets, just starting out, looking at the landscape, and knowing what you know about your businesses and software as a whole, and the need for software to drive operational efficiencies, especially from an ERP type perspective? What's one piece of advice that you give yourself, or what's one learning that you could give to the world, essentially?
Focus on what you're good at, right? So if you want to be a medical cannabis company, then be a medical cannabis company and be the best medical cannabis company. If you want to just do pre-rolls, then just do pre-rolls and be the best pre-roll company out there. I think you find the most successful companies in this industry right now, especially in the Canadian market, are the companies who focused on their strengths. They focus on what they're good at, and that's all they're focusing on, and they're not trying to take on too much. And I think you find the companies who have taken on too much. They want to be medical, they want to be this, they want to be that, they want to do edibles, and they want to do dog food or whatever. They're not doing very well because they don't have any strengths, and they just have a bunch of stuff. So I think focus on your strengths, define your scope and own your scope and do really well at it. And I think that sort of complements Elevated Signals and Isolocity's approach too. And I don't want to speak for Hardeep and his team, but we're only going to be a quality management software. That's our scope, and we're gonna nail it, and we're gonna do the best we can at it, and because we're gonna focus on our strengths. And so that's our philosophy here internally. And I think that's a philosophy that if you're a cultivator or a processor, a producer of some sort of cannabis product, you really need to focus on what you're good at, and just make sure you're good at it and successful at it before you even think about trying to venture into other parts of the industry.
Emphasis on like continuous learning. So like when we got into the space, we went and chatted to about 70 different producers across North America to understand their challenges. And the sentiment that I would share with operators internationally is go talk to operators in all different stages of a market, right? So early stage, later stage, as much as later stages. But go and talk and try to understand, how things evolve, because selling into the medical market is very different than selling into a rec market, and selling into a rec market 3 years out is very different than selling into that rec market when it first launches, right? So there's all these challenges and hurdles that kind of will come, and it's really understanding, how do you adapt, how do you reduce that expenditure, and how do you make sure that you're able to basically change as the market is changing as well. Otherwise, you might have spent way too much in the wrong direction.
It's amazing learning. Like you couldn't have done what you did with Elevated Signals if you hadn't done the research and crafted the solution against it. And I think a lot of people just come in with preconceived notion of how certain things should work, but you nailed it. Like, even going from medical to recreational is different. I mean, this industry was illicit. It was illegal. It's medicinal. It's recreational. Like, it's all of those function completely different. So well said, guys. I feel like us three could talk for a long time, and I know I was kind of jumping back and forth through topics, but really appreciated the time. I hope everyone watching this got some great knowledge. Hit up Hardeep, hit up Christopher on LinkedIn. If you're a licensed producer, cultivator of any kind across the world, you need to be talking with Elevated Signals and Isolocity ASAP. And if there's anything that I can do for you guys or whoever's watching this, please reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. Happy to have a conversation. Thank you so much for the time, guys, and I'm sure we'll chat soon.
Likewise. Take care. Bye.